coming for you. Can't nothing stop me. I got some things I gotta do. Hey, 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 hey. I'm making a move. Study low.
Here we are. Welcome to Hired, the podcast. With me today, I have Pete Durand. Pete, one of the newest members of the Miller Resource Group team. Happy to have you joining the company and happy to have you here on the show today. Welcome, sir.
Well, thanks, Travis. I'm happy to be here both as a first-time podcast guest on the show and as an employee.
Yeah, we're happy to have you. And quite the, not that many people in the recruiting industry have a clear-cut career path to get to this role, but you especially have a very interesting path that led you here. How on earth did you end up here at Miller Resource Group?
I think it started 25 years ago, and I didn't know it then. So I met Gary, the principal at Miller Resource Group, and obviously your dad. And I think the timing was good because I had a poor experience with an executive recruiter just prior to meeting Gary. And Gary and I have talked about it. It felt like it was a commodity process. There was no long-term relationship building. I was a piece of paper pushed across the table, somebody signed, and there was a transaction. So it didn't feel natural. It didn't feel like something I wanted to do again. And I got this call about a year later from this guy named Gary Miller, and he, back then before LinkedIn, before internet research was even an opportunity to find people, he called into my company and said, "I need to talk to somebody that's really good at X." And they said, "You got to talk to Pete." I don't know why they said that, but they sent him to me. So I picked up the phone, and Gary just had this way about him that said, "Hey, this is what I do. This is why I'm calling you. I'd like to learn more about you." And then he just started asking questions. Right? He wanted to learn about me, what made me tick. And through that process, I was observing what he was pulling out of me. Mm-hmm. And at the time, I was an engineer. I mean, I went to school for engineering. I was an engineer. And it was the first time I started thinking about the dark side of the force, as we engineers call it, the sales and marketing side. But Gary was pulling me into a marketing role. And by the way, that job that we first talked about wasn't a job I wanted to pursue. We didn't move down that path. About 2 years later, he called back again with an opportunity at a small software startup in California. It was 1997. I had a 3-year-old daughter at home. My wife was about to give birth with my oldest son, and I moved to California. You don't move women from Wisconsin to California. But I loved the job, had a great experience, met some wonderful people, and then stayed friends with Gary over the next 25 years. So about a year ago, he was a guest on my podcast. Actually, one of the best episodes I've done. I think it was great. And we started talking after the show about, what do you really enjoy doing? Pete, this is something you might want to consider. I think this is a perfect match for your skills. And having been a CEO for 20 years and run businesses and grown businesses, part of what I do is hiring people. And I've made some colossal mistakes. The process wasn't good. And what I realized is that it took a lot of time to do it right. Uh-huh. So, when Gary mentioned the opportunity, we spent about 4 or 5 months drilling down. He just basically mentored and tutored me and said, let's make this happen. So here I am. And after a couple of weeks, I told him my first phone call back to him afterwards could be I made a colossal mistake or I'm where I need to be, and I think I'm where I need to be.
I think most life-changing decisions always have that as an option.
Right.
You mentioned as a CEO with hiring, you made some colossal mistakes. What were some of the biggest mistakes you remember making?
I hired someone because I knew them, or I thought they knew them, put them in a very important role in the company, and then trusted them with it. And I didn't verify, trusted but didn't verify. Right? I by the way, one of my natural tendencies is I'm an optimist. I see the best in people. I've had to build some skills to counteract that. Right? I've had to go make sure that, I use data now to make sure that we're doing things properly and tracking things properly. That it cost me a lot. Mm-hmm. in many ways that I don't need to go into. So, I needed to recognize that there are a lot more things that go into a good hire than a relationship or knowledge. So that was one. I observed a couple colossal poor hiring decisions that I didn't make, but I saw them, and 2 of them destroyed companies. Like, wow. One person destroyed an organization. So the impact of what we do, it resonates with me.
What's been the biggest surprise for you so far? I mean, you have 25, 30 years of business experience coming into this role. You've been a leader. You've run hiring processes. You've hired countless people.
Yeah.
How big a shock was it to come to this side of the business, to hiring for other companies?
I think there are two main topics, and there's kind of subtopics underneath it. The first one is I don't think I appreciated the volume of work that goes into presenting a quality candidate to a company. I'm learning in a short period of time. We'll touch or talk to 400 or 500 people to place the right candidate, right? And then the stats go down, right? You might identify 200 that really dial it in. You reach out, you contact, you have 50 conversations, then you present 20, 30 people, and that process takes a ridiculous amount of work. I mean, the manual work that this team goes through is crazy. That leads to the second thing, which is the number of tools you have put in place here to help automate that process, make data mining a little more, manageable. But I'm one of my biggest things absorbing all this is I could do this 24 hours a day if I wanted to. So managing my time will be, by the way, I like that. I like to have that volume of work and feel like I'm accomplishing something. But now I've got to work on efficiency, right? And I talk to the other successful people at Miller. They're really good about saying, Pete, here's the way you can kind of dial this back, become more efficient here. They're really willing to share. I don't think people realize, well, here's a good story, right? I just bought a home. And again, I told Travis, unfortunately, there's people doing a massive landscape project next to me. So there's cut saws going. It's great. But when you watch an artist do something that you were going to do yourself, you realize there's no way I could have done that for the cost, for the time, and had the quality. And this is the same here. When people say, I'm going to not use an executive search firm or a placement firm or a recruiter, I'm going to do this myself, they have no idea what they're not getting by doing that.
It's it's exactly like you just bought a house. I'm in the process of buying and selling my house now, and I look at all of the work that the real estate agents are putting in, all of the paperwork and contracts that they're sending me, all of the communication between them and our lenders and the insurance agents and the attorneys. And I could sell my house on my own and make slightly more of a profit, but holy cow, Pete, I would never want to do that work. It is worth every penny to me. It's the same with taxes. Yeah, I could go out there and, buy TurboTax and do it myself, but the amount of work that goes into it and the lack of confidence that I'm going to get as much of a return and going to do everything legally, it's just not there if I do it myself versus going to a licensed tax broker. I mean, so why do so many companies think of hiring differently? Why do they say, it's no big deal, we got this, we do this on our own, we can do this on our own?
Having been in those situations where either I made that decision or somebody in the position to make that call, I think it just comes down to cost, right? They look at the fees around this, and they don't. It's one of those difficult things to quantify, right? To say this fee is appropriate for this service, and it's because they haven't spent a lot of time doing it. When we deal with seasoned HR executives or seasoned, C-suite level executives or VP level who have been through this process, they will tell you that it's worth every penny because the impact an A player can have in the organization is tremendous. The impact a D player can be even more detrimental, right? So if you bring the wrong candidate in, and I don't think what people realize is we're not just spending time with our clients. The company's looking for people. We've spent years building relationships with these candidates. So we understand what makes them tick. We understand why they want to be in a particular city. So-and-so just had their first child. And, this is why this role is important to them. Or, the first time we talked to them, they thought, maybe I'll be a project manager. And what they realized over the last 3 years, I'm really good at product management. That's something we're staying in track. We're staying in touch with these people. So without that network, without that knowledge, and then particularly, our team focuses at what we call a desk, right? We have an industry that we're strong in a vertical wise. So that network you've built, that's not something our clients can replicate. There's just no way they can. So, seeing around corners and understanding industry trends goes along with it. It just gets back to expertise versus, I stayed at a Holiday Inn Express last night.
Yeah, I think a big part of it too is that it is relatively easy to get qualified candidates, to get people who have experience doing the work that you need them to do. It's not terribly difficult to use any of the countless automation tools out there to match a resume to a job description. But that's step one in the process of a 24-step process. Just identifying
That's 5%.
People
That's 5% of the time. That's 5% of the time of the process. Absolutely.
And so companies, they see that 5% as the sum total.
Oh yeah.
For a lot of recruiting firms. And frankly, if that's all you want a recruiter to do is find resumes that match your job description, hell yeah, we're overpriced. Not worth it in any sense of the word, but it's everything above and beyond that where the value of an outside professional search firm comes in.
Yeah. There's no question about it. It flips sides on the candidate side as well. So I had a conversation with the candidate today that, I said, how are you looking for new roles? He's looking for a new role. And he said, well, I'm applying to jobs on LinkedIn. And he said, I'm not getting a lot of credit for, he had some military experience. And by the way, some stellar military experience, right? Like the kind of experience most human beings never get, both technically, leadership-wise, intensity, all those things you consider. And I said, well, it's very difficult for you, let's just say his name is Bob, to say I've got really good experience. It's much easier for me to say I've met Bob. I've walked through his background. I understand everything he did. Here's why this particular experience applies to the role you're looking for in addition to what he's doing here. And this is why he's the exact right fit for this job. And he goes, well, I wish I had the ability to say that I said, just be yourself, but own up and take credit for your background. And then when someone asks you, which we typically do, can you share with me something that was monumental or momentous in your previous career that you'd like to talk about that you think applies here? And they've never been asked that question. That pulls experience out. So it's both sides. Our clients, if they don't use a recruiter, are not doing that. They get a resume. They might screen it, but they're not qualifying these people for the intangibles or the soft skills. That's the work we do. That's what makes Miller Resource so powerful is we spend a lot of time in the soft skills for culture fit, growth fit. We don't want to place somebody who leaves 2 years down the road. Right? So everybody has to make sure that they both win. We're not just working for the client, we're also working for that candidate. Both of them have to win or we lose.
Absolutely. And I think one of the biggest differences is that when companies are screening resumes, God, do I hate that term. But when they're screening resumes, what they're looking for is they're looking for the absolute best resumes. And the best search firms out there, they don't do that. When they're working on a job, when a company says, we need somebody to help us do this, the recruiter's goal is to understand what is absolutely essential to be adequate at the job. And then they take the entire world and divide it into two categories. Absolutely not quite qualified for the job, might be qualified for the job. And they talk to as many of those might be qualified for the job people as possible. And then like you were saying, Pete, digging into the soft skills, the intangibles, the things that never end up on a resume, and selling the story of what a company's potential is to those people, and finding the people who have the most potential and matching it with their vision and the company's vision. And if there's just so much above and beyond matching a resume to a job description.
Agreed. And I think if you've worked with the right, and by the way, there are other good executive search firms out there. I mean,
Miller's
not the only one. There's great people in the MRI network at other boutique firms. But if you're not dealing with a partner that is willing to push back on you as a client, you're missing something, right? So we'll push back. It could be comp. It could be, and more often than not, it's really pushing back on the story, right? And the story goes both ways. I had a candidate I talked to the other night, and it was a 7-minute conversation. And I said, John, you have no idea what you want to do. You're a good engineer. You're good at your job. You got this itch or a feeling that you want to do something different, but I can't put you in front of a client if you can't articulate that. If you can't tell them, hey, I heard the story. Here's why I resonate with the story. Here's this particular experience or skill that actually means I can help you with the story. And I can't wait to get started. You've got to feel that way. If you're just kind of, it's not going to work. And then that has to go back to the company. If I don't have a story that's compelling, it makes our job pretty difficult, right? So we've got to believe that we're connecting two good opportunities, two good people together. And then it's fun. Then it's really fun.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? About what can somebody who's unsatisfied with their job? I don't necessarily say unhappy, but they know there's something there that it's not right for them forever.
Right.
But they're not sure why, they're not sure what they're looking for. How can they go about internalizing who they are and what they want to be when they grow up to be able to articulate the story of their passion, what they want their career to be, and what they hope to help a company or an industry accomplish?
Great. It's probably the most important topic we'll talk about today, and I think it's what makes Miller Resource Group different. So, Gary said to me, Gary spent a lot of time diagnosing me, right, through this process to make sure this would be the right fit. And then he had me spend time with all of you guys, right? I mean, you guys were interviewing me, and you could have hung up the phone and said, Gary, this guy's an idiot. We're not hiring this guy. So I went through the process to get this job. And I was spending as much time trying to figure out, and what Gary spent time on is really trying to figure out what would make this a fit for you, Pete. What is it about this that makes it attractive? So there's a curiosity to what we do. There's a line of questioning. There's a methodology to tease that out, which you just described. So if I get on the phone with a candidate, the very first thing I ask them is, what makes you consider taking another opportunity at this particular point in time? Why are you interested? And sometimes they can articulate it really quickly. This is why. Boom, boom, this happened. Sometimes just very discrete set of events. We were acquired. My department's being let go. I'm looking for a new opportunity. I got a nice package. They've been treating me well. Great, right? Other time you're right. I'm not really happy. Well, then you really have to tease out why that is. And there's a set of questions you can ask, and then a follow-up question. That's the most important one, is the follow-up question. Yeah, and, right? Yes, and what does that mean? So what I've learned to do over my career that I'm now able to apply here, which is great, is really pull information out of their profile in a thoughtful way. So what sometimes you might discover is, well, the reason you're not happy, Bob, is you've discovered that as an application engineer, you are on the back end of receiving whatever the design team put together and are forced to make it work. You've just told me you'd prefer to be in the front end and design it up front and learn that. So are you telling me you want to be a design engineer or a product manager? Well, yeah. And so we drill down further, not to make sure that I don't want to make any assumptions, but we go down these paths. And then sometimes we find out, well, I get home at 7:30 every night. I work 15-hour days. I get no satisfaction out of it. Those are different types of discussions you have to have. And then you drill down, well, what would be the ideal role? What would get you excited to get up in the morning? Is it X, Y, and Z? Tell me more about that. So I usually summarize at the end of the call, and we have some ways let's make sure we're on the same page. And sometimes I hang up the phone and say, you've got to go figure it out and call me back. Not the right candidate. Let's move on. But the ones that, are curious back, constant learners, those are the people we want to work with.
It's an interesting distinction you make there, the difference between somebody who is interested in a new role for a very tangible reason. Working 70 hours a week, my commute is killer, they change in the comp plan, all those very, very clear things. But it's the people who are, there's just something in here that's not being fulfilled. Something about the why of the company, the vision of the organization, the accomplishments that they're achieving just don't, they don't get they just don't create that fire. And that can be the hardest thing for people to figure out.
Right.
What are they passionate about accomplishing, and where are they going to go to be able to utilize that passion to achieve some form of greatness? How do people do that? How do they step back and look inside themselves to figure out what do they really want to accomplish that's going to bring satisfaction to themselves and for their career?
Well, this is the challenge of our job, right? I mean, our clients want purple unicorns. I'm an engineer. I've always been an engineer, kind of trapped in a sales guy's body, but I'm part engineer. So a lot of the people we talk to are very risk averse. They don't like change. They want to be technically challenged, but in a safe environment. It's a very peculiar conversation to have. They wouldn't describe themselves the way you just described. They wouldn't think of this, how do I change the world mentality? How do I strike zeal? How do I do those things? They don't think of that. They're sometimes thinking about, I'm going to get home at 5:30 tonight. I'm going to do X. I've got my 401k in a safe place. I got my paycheck. I'm good. Other factors can cause them to look, but even then, some of the conversation, are you willing to put in your 2 weeks notice? Are you willing to have that conversation? It's a difficult conversation. Have you thought about what that's going to be like? All right, here's some thoughts on how to have that kind of conversation and walk them through it, make them comfortable. And usually our advice is you just be very direct. This doesn't need to be a 35-minute conversation. It can be very simple, but they actually have never thought of that. So, yeah, one of the things we're always looking for is impact players. That's what we call them at Miller Resource. People that will make an impact at every company they're at. And those are the people you want to find. I talked to 30 people yesterday. I found one. One. And I knew it in 5 minutes. Right? And once we spent some more time, I hung up the phone. I knew this person was the kind of person you could put in front of anyone. And they could probably play it because they do want to change the world. They know exactly what they like to do. They can tell you why their experience has scratched that itch. And they can tell you why it's not being scratched anymore and how they want to go find something else. And then you got to tease out, is it people? Is it challenge? Is it location? Is it culture? What is it that really gets you excited that would cause you to stay or leave? And then you want to make sure that the story you're selling from your client matches those.
Well, I think you made a really, really good point there. And to no fault to the people out there who have identified what's important to them. And what is important to them is being home at 5 o'clock every night, making sure your 401k is safe and secure, and that you don't hate the work you're doing. There is nothing wrong with that being your top priority, nothing at all. But those people generally aren't going to change the world.
Right.
And companies I think they really need to look inward and identify those roles that you need somebody who can change the world in order to really achieve greatness. You had a great phrase in there, finding the people that can strike zeal. And how do you think a company does that? And saying, for this position, what we really need is somebody who can do the job well, versus for this position, we need somebody, for lack of a better term, who can change the world.
Right. I'll go back to I'll reference two different companies I worked for where I felt that way. So the company that Gary placed me, 25 years ago back in California is a small software startup. And it was started by a couple people that had founded Wonderware. Right? So a very successful software company. It changed the automation world forever. and that company changed automation. So first of all, we had some people with that zeal. They'd been through that process, and they knew that hiring top talent would change their company. So when I got there, I worked with 20, then 30, then 50 of some of the smartest people and hardest working people I've ever worked with. There was it was early in Starbucks days. We had huge Starbucks industrial coffee makers in our office. And there was a point of pride who could put it posted on that was the earliest it was brewed. Like it would say 4:30 a.m. You come at 4:30 a.m. I remember leaving the office at 2 o'clock in the morning after writing code or helping QA something because everybody did everything. But it was exhilarating. It was such an exhilarating couple years of my life that zeal was there. Once I got out of that, I craved it. I went from there to GE. Okay, talk about two incredibly different cultures. Mm-hmm. I scratched different itches at GE. GE is one of the best talent development companies in the world because they force rank you. I mean, you're A, B, C, or D. If you're A, you can constantly be challenged. They will move you through that organization at a pace you cannot imagine. So I was in meetings with these A players, people smarter than me, and I thrived on it, and I got my butt handed to me, right? I mean, it's a different world but it's exhilarating. A lot of the people I talk to want to be in that environment. Engineers want to be around other people who challenge them and make them learn. They want to learn, which is it's a compelling thing to try to position to people. So it's in my opinion, it's more important than money, right? To be around people who challenge you oftentimes is the bigger motivator for people than money. That's the biggest thing. And so you got to ask the people you're talking to, both the candidate and the client, tell me about your culture. Tell me about the teams these people are going to be on. Tell me your hiring practices. Tell me what's important to you. You said earlier, just fill the role. You go find me a mediocre, just fill the role. Find me, not a long-term solution. If you're selective in your hiring process and you build good teams, well, look at Google, look at Amazon, look at Microsoft, look at these organizations that raised the bar from the beginning. It's hard to get into those organizations. They hire some whip-smart people. And it's exhilarating to walk in those buildings. And those people have an air about them. It's pretty attractive. Mm-hmm. Really pretty attractive. Yeah,
they'll find the best people, and then a lot of times they'll get the hell out of their way.
Oh, absolutely.
Sure they've got everything they need.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is. It's very true.
So, Pete, you talk to a lot of smart people. You host your own podcast, Eating Crow Show. So if anybody's looking for great topics on leadership and entrepreneurship, make sure you check out Pete's podcast, Eating Crow, wherever you get your podcasts. But I want to talk to you a little bit about that and some of the incredible people that you've spoken with and what you've been able to learn from them.
Well, I've had over 30 guests on the program, and I think one of the reasons I'm in this job is because of the podcast. So I had come back from a client visit with a coworker, my good friend of mine. We'd known each other for a long time, and we lost this customer and literally got just our butts handed to us for an hour in the meeting. And as we drove back, I just pulled up my camera and said, the company's asked me to do more LinkedIn video. We just posted a video called "We Ate Crow Today" and talked about how we were wrong, but we're going to go win this customer back. It really resonated. People said, man, if you did a podcast about eating crow, I'd listen to it. So I sat down and Googled how do you start a podcast and created it. And you and I have talked. How did you come up with the guest list? What did you do? I literally sat down. You kind of start with your circle of people that would say, yeah, Pete, I'd be on your podcast. You're a good guy, whatever. And then you expand out. I have about 200 people on my guest list. And I have stretch guests, people that I think would never say yes that do. And what I've learned is, of the 30 guests, only 2 or 3 did I not enjoy the episode. I didn't click with them. But the other 27 are just wonderful human beings, right? they're just wonderful human beings, and they have so much to offer, and some of them don't even know it. One of my favorite guests is a guy named Rich Font, Air Force guy, never went to college. Literally one of the most articulate guests I've had in a long time. He knows exactly who he is. He left a very stable job in manufacturing to become a photographer. I mean, big pivot in life. And he'll talk about why and what he's learned, and we've stayed in touch with each other. And then, I did reach out to someone who was a very inspiring author, 15-time New York Times bestselling author. I've read a lot of his books. I used him in one of my startups as an example for a lot of my clients. And I just reached out and said, Jim, big fan. This is what I do. Love to have you on the show. And he said, sure. I asked him 4 questions. And he gave me 4 answers that were like 15 minutes long. And he wasn't bloviating. They were like, you should have been taking notes. Like I was literally. So, stories that resonate for me are people that have faced some sort of challenge in their life, whether it was external or internal, and then had to really step back and rethink their thoughts, their position, and make a fundamental shift, either professionally or personally, that most of us aren't willing to make. And then you drill down into why, and most of the time, those things produce great fruit. So I love talking to people like you're doing. I just love talking to people and becoming a better human by just listening to them. And the podcast is a great way. In fact, when I edit my podcast, most of the time I take me out. Unless I'm adding value, I just need to shut up. So it became a passion of mine, became one of my best hobbies. And when Gary first suggested that I do this, we both centered in the fact that I'd basically be doing this. Talking to clients and customers is almost like having a podcast episode every day.
It really is. Mm-hmm. Well, if your goal on your show is to talk to people who have experienced challenge, and in order to overcome that challenge, make a shift in their life to do things fundamentally differently. Mm-hmm. Let's put you on the spot, sir. What's one of the biggest challenges that you faced, and how did you overcome it?
Well, besides this leap into this role, which will be an episode of my podcast. I've only done one episode where it was just me. I'll probably do one, and maybe even have Gary on it. One of the biggest impact challenges in my life was when my oldest son was born, and this was in 97. He was our second kid, so we had some idea of what babies were supposed to do. We brought him home from the hospital the night he was born, and he passed out on my chest at about 1 a.m. as I was ready to bring him into my wife so she could feed him. And some people think he's just tired. Something wasn't right. Mm-hmm. So we called our doctor, and he said, you go right to Children's Hospital right now. Don't just go to Children's Hospital. So we went in, and they took him from us. Long story short, he had a thing called volvulus, which is where your internal organs kind of twist around before you're born, and nothing was getting from his mouth through his stomach into his organs. It was just coming back up. And the doctors thought they're like, it's meconium, it's okay. He would literally lay down and vomit. So he hadn't eaten or drinking anything since he'd been born. He was so dehydrated. They said, he's probably going to die. If he doesn't die, we're going to cut him open. He's probably going to have loss of major organs and potentially have a very difficult life. That was the smack in the face we got when we walked into Children's Hospital. And, I was a pretty successful executive, flying high, in my career, and work was a big priority in my life. And for the next 2 weeks, I spent 12-hour days in the NIC unit sitting by my son's crib, and I took the night shift so my wife could be home with my daughter, who was 3, who had no idea what was going on. And then I'd come home in the day shift and work and try to get 2 hours of sleep. And when they took him out of surgery, he was cut literally in half. They cut his stomach open from one side to the other. This is if any mothers are listening, they'll get this. They bring us into the NIC unit, and there are probably 16 beds, and then there's 2 rooms that are completely isolated, and they have their own door on them. They're sealed. And they had us in when they said, just be prepared. This is what you're going to see. He was laying flat on a ventilator. He's a day old, right? He's tiny. And the machine is breathing for him. It's going, he's hooked up to all these tubes, just laying there, completely listless. My wife goes over, gets next to him, and starts talking to him and says she loves him. I threw up in the sink. And the nurse smiles. She goes, it's always the dads. I didn't know how to process that, right? It happened to him again a month later. The same thing recurred, which is highly unusual. So, talk about a pivotal eating crow moment. I literally had this. By the way, we were very fortunate. He survived. He's doing fine. College athlete, great kid. All sorts of good things are positive. But we saw other children who didn't make it out of there. And, it was a gut check to say, Pete, you're good at what you do. You're a good executive. But, buddy, there are way more important things in life than what you're doing right now. My parents could see a change. My family could see a change. I've still cranked some crazy hours, traveled a lot, but the anchor's been there from that point forward. The anchor's always there. So I'm not driven by money, which is unusual for somebody to spend so much time facing customers. Maybe my wife hope that was a little bit more maybe motivated by money at times. But the reason I'm doing this job, the reason I do the podcast, is I take great satisfaction out of deep personal relationships. And, I hope most people don't have to go through a life-changing event to realize where their core is. But that's my quick story.
Boy, what an incredible story. And it truly is amazing how often so many great things in a person's life can be born out of some of the worst moments of their life.
No question about it. No question. There's no playbook for what we went through. People that are facing these things, I tell them there's no, you just go home and you start dealing with it. Right? You just do. And you can let it own you. We have a very strong faith, which is a big part of what got us through. It also, like I said, there's a lot more bigger things out there than me. So.
What an incredible story. So happy that the outcome was good for you and so sad for so many people who the outcome isn't as good as yours.
We're big fans of children's hospitals now. I mean, those nurses and those doctors were some of the most amazing. And by the way, they're trained to punch you in the face, right? They're trained to show you, to literally tell you the worst possible outcome right away. And then I didn't realize at the time. I was like, wow, what are you saying? Because anything better than that is just that. It's better than that. Here's the worst possible scenario. Anything beyond that's better. And then you just start to think that way. So, some very talented, gifted people in those organizations.
Some amazing people doing some amazing things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Pete, any last words of wisdom out there for anybody thinking of getting into the recruiting industry, or anybody looking for a job, or anybody looking to hire people? What's the last thought for them?
Well, let's start with the people that are looking to hire people first, right? Again, my only advice to you is it's just like hiring a really talented trade or an expert in anything. You can't kind of dabble in recruiting. The ramifications are too big. The financial investment's so far more important than you can imagine. So I'd suggest you step back and think about what are our long-term goals, how important are our people. If your people are the number one most important thing in your company, it's the first place you need to invest. So we'll start with that. By the way, you'd expect me to say that, but I really believe it. For people looking for jobs, my biggest thing for them is it's a job to find a job, right? You've got to invest time into the process, and don't be afraid to respond to a recruiter if they reach out to you. Have a discussion and put some time into the discussion. Be prepared. Think about the questions you want to ask, things that you think are important, that are of importance to you, that you want them to know. That makes that dialogue a lot better. So I think, and by the way, embrace it. There's so much opportunity out there. Don't be afraid of it. Just go with the process. And then for those looking to get into executive search, I'm new at this, so I may not be the most qualified person to tell you, but if you approach this job and make it about relationships, it will be very, very satisfying. The financial rewards will come. But if people truly hang up the phone with you on both sides and feel like you care and you're competent and responsive and have done your homework, you'll have a really bright future.
Pete, thanks so much for being with us today. Really appreciate it. Please make sure to subscribe to this podcast if you liked it. And if you liked it, I'd really appreciate you rating us and leaving us a review. And make sure to check out Pete's show, Eating Crow, for his next great guest, next great topic about failure, pivoting, and achieving success. Pete,
thanks,
thank
Travis.
you.
It's been a pleasure. I appreciate
I'm
it. Thanks,
making
man.
a move. Study long, study wrong. Ain't nothing gonna happen on its own. I'm making a move. Don't need no hinges for this song. I got joy all through my soul. I'm making a move. Get up, get out. Mr. Sun is shining on me. I see you.